And I don't know about you, Nicky, but I feel like I might have seen this before. Inter 0, Milan 1 on Sunday night. A thriller for many different reasons. But the script is maybe a little bit of a rehash.
It's starting to feel like it. Last season, Milan and Inter played 5 times astonishingly between the 2 Coppa Italia legs and then the Supercoppa as well. And Inter did not win any of those. Milan coming up on top 3 times, 2 draws. It's starting to feel like you throw in this one to make it 6 in a row without Inter winning. Like the red and black side of the city has the upper hand in this one just at the moment, and certainly Mike Maignan had the upper hand last night. But it's funny, Andy, because you say that, and it is a really recent trend. Worth saying a few things on that. First of all, actually, it's not just Milan. Inter keep coming up short against big clubs, and maybe that's a topic we'll get into in a little bit. But for the derby specifically, it actually was completely the other way around for basically a decade. From 2012 to 2021, I think Milan won a total of 4 derbies, and one of those was in extra time. So for a very, very long time, Inter held the upper hand in this rivalry. And yet, in this recent period, when you look on paper and think, well, Inter have been the most talented squad in Italy for a minute, when they've had, up until this season, more stability, of course, because Simone Inzaghi now, fine, you've got a new manager, Christian Chivu, but still a more settled squad than Milan. Meanwhile, you go through this chapter when Milan changed managers last season, changed managers again in the summer, but suddenly, all of a sudden, they're the ones who can win the derby every time.
That's it, because we go through these now 6 successive games, as you talk about, where Inter haven't managed to put one over Milan. 3 different Milan coaches in that time. Yeah. Paolo Fonseca, Sergio Conceição, and now Max Allegri. Look, we're going to come back to Allegri in a bit, because it was one of those games that had Allegri written all over it in big neon letters. But just to have a quick recap, in case people have missed any of the detail. Inter dominated the first half. They hit the woodwork a couple of times. Maignan makes a couple of great saves. Quite shortly after the break, on a counter-attack, after Hakan Çalhanoğlu, and we'll come back to him later, loses the ball. You have a shot by Alexis Salamakers, saved by Jan Sommer, put in by Christian Pulisic for what turns out to be the winner. You think that Inter are getting back in it when they get a penalty. Now, of course, Çalhanoğlu has missed one penalty for Inter before, but never had a penalty saved for Inter before, because that one penalty that he did miss came off the post against Napoli around this time last year in a game at the San Siro, which finished 1-1. Çalhanoğlu, one of the most reliable penalty takers on the planet. And I suppose this is really our in to talk about Mike Maignan, isn't it? Because the technique that Maignan had for taking on Çalhanoğlu, he likes, I think Don Hutchinson was saying on the UK commentary, Çalhanoğlu's safe penalty is to the keeper's bottom right, isn't it? Right in the corner. And Maignan had this interesting technique where he stepped over a little bit further to his left, as if to say, I know you want to put it in there. Are you going to put it in there? It recalled a little bit, there was a game between Brest and PSG when Neymar was there, where the Brest goalkeeper went all the way over to one side of the goal, a sort of more exaggerated version of this, and said, well, there's loads of space. Why don't you want to put it in there? And Neymar was trying so hard to put it in the corner that he hit the post, and it was the only penalty he ever missed for PSG. So, I mean, does this prove that, do you think, well, for a start, is Maignan one of the best goalkeepers in the world who never really gets the credit for it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Andy, it feels like you've been reading the column that I'm not finished writing yet, so it hasn't even been published. So all that stuff about the penalties, it was 27 out of 28 Çalhanoğlu had converted for Inter, with the one miss being that one, as you say, against Napoli last year. And what's funny with that one against Napoli last year is it is that safe penalty of his, right? It's the one he likes to hit to his bottom left, the goalkeeper's bottom right. And the reason he misses it is because he almost hits it like so close to perfect, but it just hits the inside of the post and comes back out. And I think that setup, as you say, is just such a fascinating visual because Maignan knows that. He's seen that penalty saying, go on, I'm giving you the space. If you hit it well enough into that corner, I'm not going to be able to get there, am I? I've given you that extra little bit of space. And he's almost daring him to do the same thing again and to hit it against the post. And truthfully, like, it's not a perfect penalty, but it's definitely not a badly struck penalty. It's a well struck penalty. It just is a good save. And in the context of, as you've just been alluding to, a game full of good saves by Mike Maignan. I suppose more really it was a first half of good saves and then the penalty in the second half. But in the first half, made a fantastic save to keep out a diving header from Marcus Thuram and claw that one around the post. Then there was a volley by Lautaro Martínez from the middle of the box that he pushes onto the post. And I loved this moment that Lautaro has afterwards, because you see him, like, he goes through all of it, like he's almost ready to start celebrating. Then he realizes that somehow this ball hasn't gone in because he knows he's hit it well. And then he's walking away and he turns back for a second and he does this sort of, it's not even like a full shrug, but the arms up. And it just made me think of, like, having lived in America, it would be the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. So when you're stuck in a situation where there's some bureaucrat stopping you from doing the thing you're trying to get done, and you've just been told you've got to go to the back of the line because you didn't fill the form in correctly, and it's just like, come on, man! Like, that was perfect. Like, what else do you want me to do? That was supposed to go in that shot. Like, you're just being difficult now, and I don't know where to put Maignan sometimes in this hierarchy of world goalkeepers, because he absolutely is this some of the time. But I feel like in the last couple of years, and clearly injury has been a part of the picture, he hasn't been this enough of the time. He hasn't always been at these levels. So last night, Buffon was on TV in Italy talking about him. He was in the studio. Great timing for him to be in the studio. Obviously, you can talk about things from a goalkeeper's perspective, and full of Maignan's praises, absolutely. But it just called to mind. I think Buffon once said to me in an interview I had with Buffon, where I was asking, like, what are the hallmarks of a truly great goalkeeper, and he said, in the end, in his opinion, the really, really most important quality of a goalkeeper is just to make no mistakes. Like, that's the thing that you have to be. It's not about the great save. It's not about the distribution or whatever else makes goalkeepers part of the team play nowadays. It's making really, really few mistakes. And I think that Maignan in the last couple of years has had moments where he's made those mistakes. And I also think that all goalkeepers, even the very best goalkeepers, have their seasons. I was thinking seasons in terms of like a chapter of life rather than football seasons, but you could use either. They have their better ones and their worst ones. And I think that Buffon's a great example of someone who went through a difficult chapter in the middle of his career and came through it and was even better. And maybe Maignan, after again the injuries and everything in the last couple of years, is ready to be even more back to his best. But I do think I would be jerking my knee if I just watched this one game and said, yes, he's the number one in the world, because I don't think that's always been true in the last couple of years.
I guess the thing about Maignan, so much of it is not just about the goalkeeping, is it? It's about that quiet leadership, that sort of statesman-like quality that he's had ever since he walked into the France team, that, like, people will listen to him. So when France actually lost at home to Italy at the Parc des Princes, he's the guy who turns around in the dressing room to Mbappe and Griezmann and said, look, that's just not good enough. And no one else is saying that. He's not one of those motor mouths who talks all the time, but when he speaks, people really listen. And I think that's really important. I think if we look at him, like, both in the context of derbies, in the context of the Milan derby, and in the context of what happened last season, which was obviously pretty inglorious and has led us to the point where Max Allegri is trying to regenerate and renew Milan at the moment. Last season, you're right, was not a good one for Maignan, because his leadership was not able to lift them up. So I think you can understand. Of course, he's out of contract at the end of the season. Nearly went to Chelsea in the summer, and what a signing! In my opinion, he would have been for them. A, because he's better than all their other goalkeepers, and B, because he's a leader in a team that sometimes you feel lacks that a little bit. But it's funny. I felt like he was Milan in microcosm last season, because he had some of his best moments in the derby, whereas we say Inter were unable to beat them over those 5 games and a couple of different coaches. I think particularly of the two Coppa Italia semi-final legs, where Inter are walking out of that thinking, hang on, how do we get hiding in that? I just don't understand. It's not commensurate with what actually happened in the game. And like Maignan is a massive part of that. But of course, when we're writing the narrative, we have to be honest and say, just like in those games last season where the results didn't necessarily match the flow, there was luck involved in there as well. I think it's easy for us to sit there and say Allegri masterclass, but this is a game that could have come out of last season, isn't it?
Yeah, it's why football's so ridiculous, because absolutely the narrative now is, look, Inter never win these big games. They never win the derby. Milan have won again, and it's an Allegri vintage. But I mean, even if we accept that, because we should accept that a goalkeeper is part of the team, and at the other end, arguably Jan Sommer is the reason that Inter lose, because perhaps he should do better on the shot from Salamanca's that ends up being pushed out to Pulisic to win. So a goalkeeper is part of your team, so you don't ignore the contribution of the goalkeeper when you're analysing a match. But even accepting all of that, I mean, Acerbi's header just hit the post. Acerbi's header a few inches to the right goes in, and I don't believe that Maignan would keep it out. And so, football comes down to these tiny details, and that changes games, and that is part of the story that is always true. I think that I just to add one more thing on Maignan, I think it's worth saying as well, while I'm talking about his perhaps not always being able to perform to these levels. Part of your success at any position on a team, but certainly for goalkeepers, it's true as well, comes down to the stability of everything around you. And the fact is that last season, he was very much like the rest of his teammates, affected by having managerial upheaval, by having a defence that was often a mess. It's hard to look as good as you can as a goalkeeper when the defence in front of you is a mess, when the whole team in front of you is a mess. So I think that's worth saying as well. But in terms of the greater narrative, it's just so hard to know where things are going to fall by the end of the season. But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that even putting aside this derby specific narrative, Inter have lost 4 games out of 12 this season, and they look too good to do that.
Yes.
And Milan have lost 1 game this season, and they don't look as good as Inter to me. I don't think, watching the game last night, that Milan looked like a better team than Inter to me. And so the question with me is, why, after a third of the season, is the team that looks like the better team not just doing better? And I think that's maybe the more interesting question in the big picture. I guess
it's like seductive versus consistency. Isn't it really? Like, it feels like if we take out, obviously we're talking about this derby game, but if we put this derby game in the context of the season so far, rather than putting it in the context of the derby, I think it's quite interesting. Again, it's very tempting to say Allegri, comes out after the first game of the season against Cremonese and goes, where they lose, of course, at home to a promoted side, albeit a pretty good one. And Allegri says, look, lads, if we're going to win stuff, we can't defend like this. If we're going to go anywhere this season, we cannot defend like this. And it's like he's got such authority, they all go, okay, and they don't let in a goal for the next 6 matches or whatever. So I think because of the personality of Allegri, because of his stature in Italian football, it's easy to say it's all part of the plan. But much as we talked about Maignan having a great game, about the luck of Inter hitting the woodwork, etc., all those other things, I think we also have to say, on top of that, that the other thing that was not part of the plan is that midfield, really, that Milan have got. So Modric, who has been so good this season, again, by the way, and he's a better player now than he was when he was in his early 30s, which is a bit weird, but I think that is the case. The other thing is Rabiot, very much an opportunity signing, very, very important for this Milan and in this game.
Yeah, what's funny, you say that because actually the name I thought you were going to head towards was Fofana, because of course it was him winning 2 challenges and then taking the ball forward that starts the move for the goal. And
it's a great 3. It's a great 3.
Yeah, I think so. I think before that, Fofana might have had the only shot on target before the 2 that were in the goal. But yes, Rabiot has absolutely brought something to that picture. It's as you say, it's about the 3. It's about how they work together as well, and variety that they offer you. And Rabiot, I felt like had not such an obvious night last night. I think Modric had not such an obvious night last night, and perhaps that's inevitable because in the end, this was to the game where Inter had far more of the ball and where their midfield was able to at least control possession much more of the time. But I think that variety in what they give you, and clearly you've got Modric as the regista, the one who's going to just look after the ball for you and to keep everything ticking. But Rabiot has got that range in him, that ability to carry, that ability to get up and down the pitch. And I think those things are really important for a team that in the end, and for Fofana as well, doing a lot of those same things are really important in the end for a team that is going to, because it's an Allegri team, compact and then stretch. It's going to let itself be very, very tight and try to be very close when it wants to. But then when it wants to go, it's going to want to extend the pitch really quickly, which is, again, exactly what they did on the goal here. I think that's the way they've set that midfield up, gives them possibilities to do that.
I suppose a bit of a cloying thing to say, but is it a good thing for Inter that after the questions over them in big matches, which, funnily enough, I think they only really answered last season once you got to the back end of the Champions League, and they saw off Bayern and they saw off Barcelona in the semi-finals. Of course, no one really remembers that because of what happened in the final in particular. But is it a good thing for them to be able to go to Atletico Madrid this midweek and have a big game to get over the big game and kind of have another pop-up answering the question? Like, are they good enough to, not are they good enough, but are they like mentally strong enough, I suppose, and tactically robust enough to get it done in these biggest games?
It feels like a game that has a bit more writing on it now than it should, because Inter have won all of their Champions League games. So to a great extent, if they lose this game, it doesn't matter at all. They're still going to be in a very good position in the Champions League group. It feels like it's maybe suddenly a bit more significant, partly because actually when you look at who Inter have beaten in the Champions League this season, they've won all of their games. They've won them all very comfortably. They haven't conceded a goal, but they're all teams they're supposed to beat. They're not teams that you look at and think those are a team you would have expected necessarily to upset them. Whereas Atletico is a real European test. And it's coming off the back of, this was literally the first game all season in which Inter haven't scored, League or Europe. So I think those things combined, and the fact that, of course, by reputation, if not always by reality, in more recent chapters, Atletico are such a hard team to score against. I do think there's going to be a bit of pressure on Inter to show up and show up in the way that they want to, which is being this front-footed team, which is being the team that has outshot everyone in Serie A for ages now, that has far and away the best XG in Serie A, like a team that wants to take the game to you. That I think is going to be make it into feeling like a more meaningful game. So I think if they were to go into this game and lose it 2-0, that starts to feel like, ridiculously, by the way, because in the end they're still only 3 points off the top of the table and who they are hasn't suddenly changed. But it starts to feel like an actual question at that point. And it was interesting that you frame it this way, Andy, as well, because actually Chivu, after the game in one of his post-match interviews, said almost exactly this. There was one of the journalists was asking him, are there any positives you can take from this? And he was being pretty not really about it. He didn't really want to say, there's this positive from it. He said, the positive right now is we've got a game in 3 days. The positive right now is we can get this out of our system. But I think that he is not shying away from that thing that I just said, which is, okay, go in the next game and prove that this was the anomaly. But the problem is, if you think like that and then you do go into that next game and have another bad game, does that start to get into a feeling of, I'm not trying to suggest crisis because it's ridiculous words to use, but you understand what I mean, don't you?
I do,
starts to feel
absolutely.
like a trend.
I do, absolutely. And it feels that this is a continuing theme of this Serie A season, really. Maybe because no one's completely taken a grip of the league. And if I was to ask you to say, okay, off the back of this, who would you back to finish higher out of Inter and Milan? What are their prospects of the season? Are both genuine title challenges? They're all kind of pointless questions, really, I think, until a team or a couple of teams have started looking like they're there for the duration. If I can quickly, I don't really like doing this, but if I can quickly read us through the top of the Serie A table so people know how tight it is. So Roma won at Cremonese this weekend. Roma are top. They're 12 games in, all of them. Roma 27 points, Milan 25, Napoli 25, Inter 24, Bologna, who are in great nick at the moment, 24, and Juventus, who are 6, a little bit further back, 4 points behind Inter and Bologna with 20. It's there for the taking, actually, for whoever. And we're not talking about, we can say it's an early part of the season, but it kind of is and it kind of isn't. We're almost the third in, aren't we? So it's not an insignificant part of the season. So I guess the question is less, where do you think these teams will be at the end of the season? Because I don't really think that's the right question. What do Inter and Milan need to do going forward, say, between now and New Year?
I think the Inter question, again, maybe it's why this Atletico game feels more important, the Inter answer, I should say. It feels really oversimplifying, but I think it's still true. Like, they need to win what Italians call the scontri diretti, the head-to-heads, the games that are your 6 pointers at that end of the table. Because in the end, that is why they didn't win the title last season. If you go this season and last season combined, and you look at their games against Juventus, Milan, Roma, and Napoli, which is not the whole relevant list, of course. Atalanta were obviously very strong last season. There's other teams. But if you look at those 4, I think they've won now, it's like 2 out of the last 11 games.
Yeah.
You have to win some of those if the table's going to be tight, because otherwise those games are going to be the difference. So I think for Inter, I don't think they're suddenly a bad team. Like I said, all the underlying stats are good for them. They hold the ball better than anyone. They take more shots than anyone. They should and will continue to win far more than they lose. The problem is, if you lose the big ones, that hurts you more. And the problem as well, perhaps, is that they don't seem to know how to draw. It's always, same as Roma, by the way, it's always either win or lose. And so that feels like, to me, the thing they need to resolve. For Milan, it's almost the reverse of that picture. Milan under Allegri have been very hard to beat. They're the only team in that list you just read out. They're the only team that's only lost 1 game. Every other team has lost multiple games, because Milan are, in that classic Allegri way, making themselves difficult to beat. At the same time, they've thrown away points really cheaply. They blew a 2-goal lead against Parma. They drew 2-2 with Pisa. They've had games where they've looked a lot less than this. So they still, I would say, are a team understandably finding who they are under Allegri. And I think it's worth saying as well that Allegri, in his best chapters, very consistently was always a manager who would try a few things early in the season, settle on a formula in the middle of a season, and then tend to get better for the last part. So there's reasons to believe that can happen for Milan, especially when you consider, you mentioned it at the top of the show, someone like Christian Pulisic has been out for a while, came back and scored right away. But if the team can stay fit and get some consistency going, I do think it is really above all about that for them, just getting the consistency going in those smaller situations. To get to the other teams, it's all different. For Roma, I just want to say quickly, since we mentioned them and they are top of the table, it's going to be scoring goals. They've got the best defence in the division. They need to keep scoring goals. They did this weekend. They scored 3 of them against Cremonese, but can they keep it up? That's going to be the question.
I guess my question is, in that case, I mean, if you look at the top scorers list in all the big European leagues, Serie A really stands out because there's not a superstar there's not a superstar goal scorer in superstar goal scorer form in Serie A. That's the difference. And we love, and you love, to demolish those old cliches about Serie A, defenders finishing school, all that sort of stuff. But does this feel like a season where defence actually could win the league? Or does it feel like a season where a striker that you sign in January, who can score you 10 goals in the second half of the season, will win you the league? And will that affect, I guess, the transfer dealings? Because we nearly had this exchange, didn't we, between, let's take it, for example, between like Roma, who are top, and Milan, who've just won this game. We nearly had that exchange between Dovbyk and Santi Jimenez. So both of those teams knew there was a gap already. They knew there was something to be filled. It's felt to me like the shadow of Lukaku, like while he's been out over the first half of this season, has hung over proceedings a little bit, because like a good Lukaku would make all the difference to this title race, and a fit Lukaku would make all the difference to this title race. And I guess from Inter's perspective, you've got that player really in Lautaro. How do you get him in the best possible conditions to basically win you the league?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a fascinating scoring charts when you look at the top of it, and the three people who are joint on 5 goals is Orsolini, Pulisic and Çalhanoğlu. None of those is a striker. I mean, Pulisic is sort of playing as a striker, but he's not a striker. So it's a really fascinating situation that is the case. And you're right that I love to smash down those cliches. At the same time, yes, this does feel like an anomalous season, because it's God, it was only a bit over a week ago I watched 3 0-0s back to back on a Saturday, and that was not the most inspiring day of watching football in my life. So there is definitely a gap for those things, and there's lots of circumstantial parts of that. Clearly, Atalanta are a team who've scored a lot of goals and who have lost the manager that was a major part of that mix. As you say, Lukaku's been injured. But then there are names, and Retegui obviously left, but there are names like Lautaro who maybe could be scoring more than he is.
To me, the obvious solution for one team to win the league would be give Lautaro a month off, have him have loads of ice baths, because the amount of football he's played over the last couple of years is not commensurate with the sort of consistency that you should be getting out of a player of that ability. And he is the centre forward who could win any of these teams the league, isn't he?
Well, do you know, it's really interesting as well. For the first time, I feel like I've seen people questioning the Thuram-Lautaro partnership. Now, I think it's...
Really? Huh.
I think it's kind of nonsense. I think it's people looking for a thing to pick at. But I do think... and actually, one of the things that Inter have going for them is that they've kind of got depth up front this season, right? Boni has looked good in his flashes, and Pio Esposito, who clearly scored for Italy that day, gives you another option. But I do think one thing that is interesting about Inter specifically is that Inter are this team that, again, dominates possession, creates more chance than anyone else in the league. But what they don't do is take on their opponents one-on-one and beat them by dribbling past them. They had the fewest dribble past opponents' attempts of any team in Serie A last season. I think they're last again this season. If not, they're very close to it. And Thuram is almost the one player in the attack who does that a bit for them, because it's just not the way they attack people. And watching that Milan game last night, you almost felt like you were crying out for someone who would do that. And Chivu even spoke about it after the game. They brought Diouf off the bench, and that was a bit of what he was trying to do. He's like, he's the one guy we've got who'll go for his man. So I think it's not always just about like what whether you have good enough strikers. And to have good enough strikers, I agree with you. I think the real problem for their attack might be just a bit of exhaustion still, given the overhang from last season. But there is something as well in the recipe you use, isn't there, in finding the right balance in attack. And I think that's why it's still worth saying that while I agree with you, a third of the season is not nothing. It's a big chunk of the season. I still think it's fair to say that where you have seen managerial change, so Roma, Milan, other clubs, I think Juventus clearly have had their change after the season began. I think it's fair to say we might see a very different look and feel to those attacks in February or March to what we're seeing now, even still.
Yeah, because I think if we continue down this road, we're going to go off on a sort of side discussion about, is Mike Maignan the best goalkeeper in the league, or is it Miles Fila? and then we're 10 minutes further down the road, and Roma are champions. But we will return to this on OTC as the weeks pass.